All right, welcome everybody to Virtual Coffee Lunch and Learn edition. Virtual Coffee is a tech community that allows for growth and mentorship at all levels and creates and creates opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. And today we are preparing for Hacktoberfest, which starts in a couple of days. We're doing an intro to contributing workshop, which is part of the open source Learn Path. I am Becca. I'm one of the maintainers here at Virtual Coffee, and my co-host for today is Ayu. Do you want to go ahead and give an introduction?
Yeah. So I'm Ayu. I am the documentation and monthly challenge team lead here at the Virtual Coffee. I'm also a technical blogger and I am based in the Netherlands. I'm very, very excited to be here and especially because Oktoberfest is around the corner.
All right, awesome. So what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through the course. We're going to talk through some of the things that we find most important. And at the end, there is actually a contribution that you can do. You don't have to do it today if you don't want to. If you want to save it for Hacktoberfest so you can get credit for a pull request, that's totally fine and valid. So we'll probably stop just short of walking you through that point. But if you have questions, we can talk through it so you know what you can be working on. I am going to go ahead and share, let's see, this screen. Okay, so now you should be able to see this is the open source education with OpenSauce. Let me see if I can actually move. Okay, so I moved it to a different window on my computer. If you can't see it, let me know. I'm gonna try and shift. Whoops, not that. Um, Sorry, I want to move my chat over so I can see it too. So if you have questions, feel free to put that in the chat as well. So we have already gone through the Becoming a Maintainer course. You can find that on our YouTube playlist, but now we'll go into the open source course. And so the idea behind the open source course is to kind of walk you through number one, like what is open source? Why is it important? What you should do to contribute to open source? And then what does it mean to be a positive participant in open source? So this, you can feel free to go back through this, but we'll go ahead and start with what is open source. So I'll give a little bit of a definition behind that. So it says here that it's source code that's made available to the public. So it allows anyone to view, use, modify, or distribute the code. So for a lot of us, this is in GitHub. So we can see other people's code on GitHub. And in order to be open sourced, there needs to be some license there. And so you can see a little bit more about licenses down here in this section. We're not going to go too deep into licenses, but there's some resources there that you can see. And the thing behind open source is that you're able to contribute and that it's in the open. And so that's one of the things that I think is most important to emphasize, that communication is happening in the open. We can see the code, it's available in the open, and people are allowed to do things with it. So for us, like, we're very excited. In a couple of days, we're going to be open sourcing our Virtual Coffee contributors repo, which has all of our process documentation from the last 5 years that we've been doing Virtual Coffee. And so we have a license there that basically says folks are allowed to use this. We want credit. We want attribution for it. So you can say, like, okay, I'm going to start my own community. It's modeled after Virtual Coffee. That's awesome. Like, we want people to be using these resources, but it's also useful to attribute that this community, if you're using our processes, is taken with the inspiration from the Virtual Coffee community. So that's a little bit more about it. One of the nice things about open source is the transparency. I was reading this quote yesterday, and it was talking about how, like, it's always great to have more eyes on something. It gets complicated, right? Because sometimes more eyes means more conversations and more time that you have to spend discussing things. But it also allows you to move in an innovative way, often to catch mistakes more quickly, and then to be able to work on it together. Um, The thing about open source is things kind of started a long time ago, right? Well, I say a long time ago, but I guess that's relatively speaking. So, really, in 1991, with Linus Torvalds, everything started to become popularized with the open source Linux. And so we've seen a lot of changes from that time period. And there's been a lot of new advancements in open source. And so Torvalds wanted to be able to share the project with other people. And so open source was kind of necessary. How do you share the code with other people? How do you iterate on these things together? Now we see it much differently. We found that a lot of companies all have the same problem. And what happens? One person solves the problem, and then everybody is using that open source software, or they're taking inspiration from that. So I think it's worth mentioning that things have kind of grown and changed over the years. And this is kind of like why open source, I think, is going through some growing pains at this point. There's definitely some challenges we're facing. So we talked a little bit. I mentioned GitHub. SourceForge is something that folks might be familiar with that predates GitHub. And then GitLab, which I honestly have never used GitLab, but it's an open source alternative to GitHub. And I know that it's still pretty popular as well. We've seen, okay, the evolution, we've seen corporate involvement. So, one of the challenges of open source is that there's a lot of people that are using open source software. And sometimes maintainers face burnout. They're not getting paid for their work. They're overworked. There's not enough recognition, or people are just like not valuing the time that they're putting into that. So corporate involvement can include sponsorship, but it can also include companies that are developing these technologies like Google's TensorFlow and Facebook React. And even more recently, Facebook has open sourced a lot of their AI stuff in an effort to get more people using it, to get more transparency, and to be able to innovate faster. So we do see a lot of companies out there creating their own open source projects for a number of reasons, including the ones that I mentioned. Okay, so that's just like a little bit of an introduction into open source. Are there any questions about that? Okay. I do want to talk through, why you think open source is important.
Yeah. I mean, why open source is important and why you want to contribute to open source. Because first of all, it's as the name open source, it's open. Like all the code base is open for public to see and to contribute and to distribute. And by contributing to open source, you can learn from the real world projects, right? Because say that you have your own projects, then you create it from scratch. But it's not the same with you looking at the code base that's already there. And sometimes it makes you overwhelmed, like where to see, where to look at, and things like that. So by contributing to open source, you can learn from the real world projects. You can also see like the diverse perspective, like how people like using their skills, because sometimes you're say that the solution for an issue or something would be different with others, but they both work. Say that they both work. So you can learn from that as well. Um, Also with the contributing to open source, you can stay up to date with the latest trends and access high quality resources. It's
Yeah, do
open,
you want to talk
yeah.
about open source community as well?
Yeah. Sorry, I was freezing there. So, with open source as well, like I love the open source community because if you are like contributing to open source, usually you will end up joining the community, joining the GitHub discussion of a project, so you can connect with other developers, with other contributors, and even maintainers. And if you becoming more regular contributors to an open source project, then it can open like your possibility to networking, to have more relation with other developers that can lead you to, say, either becoming a maintainer or even a job, right? Also, with the community, you can develop communication and collaboration skills. And the beauty of open source is that it's using asynchronous communication so that you can sharpen your communication, written communication, as well as like you can learn how to discuss things with other developers, other contributors, and other maintainers. And one of the things that I love about open source is to give back to the community, because many open source projects are very, very useful to so many users. And if you have the capacity, the time, the skills to contribute to an open source project, that would be great.
Yeah, I think the statistic is somewhere between like 90 and 96% of software uses open source software. So somewhere in there, pretty much anything that you touch that's technologically based uses open source software. So it's something that we all depend on. So even having a familiarity with like, okay, what is open source? How are we using it? And understanding that hey, these projects need support becomes a really important part of the process of contributing to open source. And we get the question all the time at Virtual Coffee, and I see them all the time on X, where people are saying, like, how do I expand my network? And this is like a really great way to be able to do that. If you learn how to contribute to open source, if you understand a project, if you become a valued member there, you will develop those connections, the skill set, and also prove that you're doing something. I know, like I went to a boot camp personally, and most of my projects were just me working on the project. So I had like 10 files, but it's a very different experience when you go into a code base that has tons of files and you're working with other people and you need to communicate. And so this can be a really great building block for that if you find the right project, or allow you to do other things. And so this is kind of like where we're going to talk about access to skills. Like, what does this do for you when you're contributing to open source? So go ahead, Ayu.
Yeah, so as just like the communication, contributing to open source project can help you develop your skills, like improving your programming skills, right? Because when you work on the real world projects, you can see like the real code base out there, and you learn something new. You always learn something new. So it's really great for improving your programming skills and also gain new experience with new technologies. So there are like many applications that based on JavaScript or Python or anything, and from contributing to these projects, and you can gain more experience and your knowledge with new technologies. Also, I really love that open source allows us to build our portfolio, because when you're contributing to open source, first of all, you are showcasing your skills. Either it's coding or non-code, say that you are contributing for documentation and things like that. But also you can showcase your communication, like your like your skills of communication, how you discuss something with the maintainers, how you communicate with other contributors and things like that. You also develop a problem solving and critical thinking skills, um, and also learn project management and organization, because with say that you are contributing to open source, you can have like you have to set priorities. Say that you want to tackle a couple of issues, and you need to see like which one should be prioritized, right? So you can learn something from that as well. And also it's developing leadership and mentorship skills, because the more you gain experience with contributing to open source, you already understand all the flows and things like that. You can mentor someone who are new to open source, and most probably they will feel overwhelmed with all the flow of the open source.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting always that when you start contributing to open source for the first time, there's a learning curve. There's a new vocabulary that you have to use. So things like cloning, forking, issues, pull requests, like understanding what those things mean, understanding how to make updates to your project if the maintainer asks for changes. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. I think that's a pretty normal feeling. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that IU mentioned here. So this is my OpenSauce profile. And you can see here that I have this Oscar rating. So Oscar is open source contributor rating, and it's something that's proprietary to OpenSauce. But the reason why I'm mentioning it here is because this score comes from the quality of your contributions, but it also has to do with your sway. And sway means your ability to engage in meaningful and positive conversations with other people. It also has to do with contributor confidence as well. That's something like, oh, you forked a repository. Did you follow through and contribute to that repository? But the reason why I'm saying this is because I think that it's important, especially during Hacktoberfest, to think it's not just about getting that pull request in. That's going to allow you to fulfill the Hacktoberfest requirement. But I'd like us to really think about open source and contributing to open source as like going beyond the requirements of submitting for pull requests and thinking about creating relationships with the people around us, because ultimately for pull requests will get you some digital badges, which are great. That's fun. It's nice to share with other people, but it's not going to give you those connections that will benefit you beyond Hacktoberfest. And so finding ways to deepen those conversations, the showing the Oscar rating is just a way to say like, hey, it's not just about getting that pull request in. It's about having quality work. It's about engaging in conversations and relationships. And this is why I like to encourage people to find a project that they might want to stick with. They might want to continue to be part of that community because it can help them to develop even deeper relationships with people. And I think that's like one of those things that's important with open source, and understanding what the people around you need. There's this really great quote from Evan You, who is a creator of Vue and Vite, where he talks about a contributor that kind of like worked their way up the contributor ladder. And I think maybe he was asked, like, how did they do that? And he said, well, they understood the project and they continued to create pull requests that were high quality and showed they understood the nature of the project and where we were going with it. And so I think that, it can be overwhelming to get involved in open source and you just like kind of want to sprint and get the pull request in because that's what makes you feel accomplished. But it's all of those little conversations around that and that consistency that really builds your network of people. And that's kind of, what this other section is. Yeah, sure, there's going to be increased job opportunities, but you also have access to all of these people around you. I heard a podcast episode with Kelsey Hightower where he talked about it's one of the most undervalued things. Like you go into a community and you help them out, but suddenly there are all these mentors there. There are people that are experienced, and this is why it can be really great to join the community of the project that you're contributing to, because you can see the other contributors, you can see how they help each other. And if you're stuck, they're likely to be able to help you or to know who can help you. So I would say like there's a lot of great reasons to contribute to open source, but like really understanding the project, it could be a really good goal to have. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the tools to be successful. So for us, these are some of the things that we've identified. There are plenty of other tools out there, but we find that this is essentially the basics here. GitHub and Git. So if you don't already, make sure that you have a GitHub account. To sign up for Hacktoberfest, you do need a GitHub account. But this will help walk you through the workflow of what it is to contribute to open source, how to identify issues, create pull requests, and things like that. Now, we use Visual Studio Code or VS Code here in this course. You don't have to use that. But if you're following along with our directions, we recommend it. You don't need a Discord, but the point is many communities are in Discord or in Slack. OpenSauce, we moved from Discord to GitHub discussions. but there are, different ways that communities talk to each other. So let's see. This is an introduction to Git. I don't know that we necessarily need to go through all of this, but it allows you to track your changes in code. And so basically, when you're contributing to open source, you're never going to contribute directly to the project. That is dangerous. That's how security vulnerabilities are introduced or how bugs happen. I mean, they happen without that as well. But it's very easy to make a simple mistake. And so this is why it's important to learn how to clone and fork a repository. When you fork that repository, you're taking it from where it originates and you're making a copy on your own GitHub account. And so when you're working on making the update that issue requires, you're doing that on your copy. So if you mess something up, it's okay. You're not messing it up in the main repository. So you're preserving that in its state. And so you create a branch to allow you to make these changes. And then eventually you'll create a pull request that on the original project that says, I would like to introduce these changes into the project. And that's where the maintainer or somebody on the team will go ahead and look and see if, number one, it makes sense, if you have followed the requirements, and if there are any other issues there. Sometimes you'll find that there are merge conflicts. That is not unusual. So it's okay to be scared by it, but it definitely happens. So here we talk a little bit about some key features in GitHub. So I'm gonna, let's see, probably take a look at maybe the intro course. Okay, so this is our course. So this is where you find this whole course is in this repository. And on this repository, this is our code as it exists. These are the issues. These are the current pull requests. And you'll see here that this is how you clone the project. This is how you fork the project. Oh, look, we're over 500 stars. That's amazing. So let's see here. We're just going to look through the issues. We'll walk you through things more specifically later. But there are a bunch of different issues here. So we have documentation updates. We have feature requests. Looks like there's no bug reports right now, so that's good to know. But if you do see a bug is a problem with the code base. Okay, so recently, actually, I think I just merged in a bug fix. Oh, maybe it wasn't here. It must not have been in this repository. But one of our contributors noticed that there were it must have been in the docs. There were some typos. So they created a bug report and a bug issue by selecting new issue. Now at OpenSauce, we have issue forms for everything. So a bug report, a feature request, security vulnerability, or ask a question takes you to our discussion. I'm just going to walk you through what a bug report looks like really quickly. So this is the form for that, and it gives you some information that you need to fill out. It's important if you want to be a positive contributor that you fill out as much information as possible. Actually, I'm going to take you to Virtual Coffee because I think ours is even more specific. And the reason why this is really important is because it helps the maintainers get through and to be able to sort through everything more quickly. So as you can see here, we have some more options. We do a lot of content changes to the website as well as documentation. And TypeScript conversion is, I think, a new one specifically for us, so we can put the existing code, change it over to TypeScript. So this is what our bug report looks like. Like I said, it will be different for every project, but they all might be similar. So you always want to have a title. And the title should be short and concise and allow the maintainer to understand, okay, what is the bug? is there an existing issue for that? So you should look through the existing issues. Why? Why do you need to do that? It helps the maintainer to sort through things more quickly. And sometimes you might think like, oh, well, it won't take that much time. Depending on the project, there can be hundreds or even thousands of issues that are open. So at least doing a quick search can be helpful. They want to know, okay, what happened? So describe what you saw happening. The more in depth that you can describe this, the better. And I would say, okay, so I'll get there in a second. Describe it as specifically as possible, the steps to reproduce. So you want the maintainer or the triager, whoever's going through to verify that this is an actual bug, to be able to follow step by step to see what's wrong with the repository. It's also important to say where you're seeing the problem, like what browsers. So I know, like personally, in some of the work that I've been doing, everything is fine on Chrome. But if you look on it in Safari, for example, it's just a disaster. So identifying what browser becomes really important. Also, what environment you're using. Any other issues? And here's where you can create a video, you can create screenshots. Those things are so important to maintainers. It allows us to move much more quickly. And sometimes it's like, oh, okay, I didn't really understand what the person meant before, but now I do. So highly recommend if you're submitting a bug report that you add that in there. If you're submitting a feature request and you have an idea for a new design or something, it could be helpful to say like, oh, I think that this information would be more clearly shared if the design looked like this, and put a mock in there if you can. And then I've read the code of conduct. So that's a little bit about issue forms. I really wanted to say it's very important to follow all of the steps there. Pull requests. I'll talk about pull requests, and then Ayu, maybe if you can talk about, actually, Ayu, will you talk about pull requests and forking?
Pull requests and forking. Okay, yes. So pull requests basically is like, you can say it's like a proposal of changes. So say that you have changed something, fixing a bug or creating a feature. And the next thing you do is to propose these changes to the project maintainers. So after you create a pull request, the maintainers, they will review your pull request and they will see if you need to, if it's already okay and they can merge it in, or if there are still things that you need to fix. And then forking is creating a copy of a repository under your GitHub account. So it's like your remote copy of the project. And yeah, I think the last one is GitHub Actions. It's just a tools like it's a tools to automate like workflow, to automate tasks like building, testing, and deploying the code.
Muted, but I'll show you. I think I'm unmuted. Yes, I'm unmuted now. One of the GitHub actions, let's see, github.com. I guess I could do that. We have different GitHub actions here, and so it's usually in the .github and workflows folder. You don't necessarily need to know any of this, but all of these things are run when on a specific command. Actually, probably the guestbook is a better example. So you can see how the actions are run if you look at a pull request. So this is Ayu's pull request. And Ayu has followed pretty much all of the, actually, it makes more sense for me to show you a new contributor. Okay, so we have a new contributor here. And this GitHub action is run for a new contributor. And so this message comes and says, congratulations on contributing, on completing the How to Contribute to Open Source chapter of the Intro to Open Source course. with your contribution to this repository with their name. You're almost at the end of the course. Create a highlight of your contribution to our guest book using the instructions in the next chapter. Okay, so the GitHub action takes a look at the person. I think this one is actually triggered by the title of the pull request. So we say specifically in the course to title it add username as a contributor. And so the action looks for that title and then it runs and leaves this message. It also lets us know that the PR compliance checks have passed. So we have a list of things. In order for the pull request to be approved, it has to pass these certain compliance checks. And so it lets us know that it has passed all of the things. So it helps maintainers, again, to be able to move more quickly. And it also makes sure that contributors are following all the steps. So then we don't have to go back and say like, hey, your title is not approved. You need to fix the title. If somebody has not passed that, let's see, probably one down here. Well, all the titles actually look pretty good down here. That's a cute GIF. Okay, so they must have resolved the issues. So anyway, it looks like everyone that we have resolved their issues, their compliance issues, but it will let them know, hey, your title needs to be in this particular format. So that's one way that we're using GitHub Actions in that particular repository. So I'm going to pause here. We have about 20 minutes left. Are there any questions? Yeah, Mika.
Hi. When I've contributed before to Virtual Coffee, I think, or maybe it was open sourced, it's awesome that y'all have the GitHub Actions and like a template. It makes it so easy to interact with. But I guess a question that's come up in my mind sometimes is there will be code comments as you're like kind of filling out the template. And I'm wondering if it's best to leave those or to remove them, or if it matters.
So are you talking like somebody reviewed your pull request and then has comments?
No, I mean, like whenever you're writing the markdown, there will be like a code comment that will say, make sure to fill this field out completely, or
Oh,
I can't think, sorry, of like a super specific example, but
okay. I don't think I am. Maybe I have a docs. Well, I should be able to pull this up. I think I know what you mean.
mhm.
Let's go to the pull request template. Okay, so this is what the template looks like if you're viewing it in preview mode. But
Mhm.
if you are looking at it in code mode, it's much different. So are you talking about these things?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I honestly don't have an answer for that. I usually just leave them. Sometimes it says, please leave them in there. But these are commented out. So like, as you can see, those don't show up here. It's not rendered. And when the maintainer looks at it, they're not looking at that information. What I will say is if you are submitting a pull request, don't just like delete a whole section. I can't like, don't take out the whole description section and not fill it out. But I would say otherwise, I don't know. Ayu, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for me personally, I would leave it as is, because it will be like my guidance to fill in what I need to fill in. But what I see often from especially new contributors, they put the details like inside the comment out. So when we see in the preview mode, we don't see them. But if you see from the code, it's there, only like inside those arrow. So that's why we cannot see it. So what I like to do is always like say like after the description header, and then I will make a space, and then I will write it down what I need to fill in there while keeping the comment out underneath so I can see what I need to fill in. Yeah, I think that.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that people were doing that. So that might be something too that we can improve. Like up here in this comment, please fill in all areas. And then say something like, be sure to fill it in outside of whatever these things are called.
Yeah.
Just to find a way to make it clear for people. Because it is confusing. I say this every time. They have issue forms in GitHub, but they don't have
Yeah.
PR forms. And PR forms would make it so much easier because this is really confusing to look at if you're not used to it.
True. I really wish they have the form like as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years now. So
Yeah.
if you're watching GitHub. Okay, so here's how to get started with Git and GitHub. I don't know that we necessarily want to. Do we want to walk through this, Ayu? We can walk through either contributing to the guest book or to our Preptember repository.
We can do that, but probably it's not what we're seeing here because here we want to create a new repository and stuff.
I guess maybe let's talk through finding projects to work on. We are again having a kickoff on October 2nd. We will be walking through creating a pull request for your first Oktoberfest submission. But one of the things about contributing to open source, one of the biggest questions is how do you find issues to work on? And that's a really valid question. And one of the top answers is find a project that you use and then contribute to that project. And I know early on that wasn't super useful to me. I was just like using whatever project I was told to work with. But now with more technologies I use, the easier that it becomes. And a lot of times I'm not making really big changes to anything. So it'll be an update to documentation, or like I was using one open source project for newsletters, and I can't remember what I had to do. I was maybe like making a subdomain from it. But the point was the documentation was copied and pasted from another part of their documentation that did not apply. And so that was like one of the things I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense because it's telling you to work with a config file that they don't even have in this technology. So I'm going to make sure that that gets updated. Somebody else that was, I think, reading our docs created a bug report because we had some typos there. So, if you're going through the process, you might stumble upon something that's worth making a PR to. I last year, I think I was reading through Astro documentation. They had changed the organization around. And so some of the links were broken. They just had forgotten to update them because of the new organization. And so I made a pull request that updated those links. And so I think like that can be a really good way to get started. Another great way is just to talk to your friends. Where are you contributing to? At Virtual Coffee, we usually have maintainers that are working on Hacktoberfest, and our maintainers are usually more than happy to help you with issues. So we'll have issues for Virtual Coffee. I know we'll have issues for OpenSauce. And I'm sure that there are other folks at Virtual Coffee who will be maintaining projects that you can contribute to. But asking people around, like, hey, where do you contribute to, can be a really nice way to say, like, okay, that's the community I want to join because I know this person and it makes me feel comfortable. Do you have any other suggestions for finding issues?
Basically, those what I am also doing, especially asking around. That's why I really love communities and like asking around if there are any issues that are say aligned with my interest and with my skill set. For example, I contribute as well, and now I'm maintaining one of Nick Taylor's repository, and then I told him that, hey, I want to learn about tests, and then he let me, like to work on a test and then like learn from that. So yeah, it's been a nice experience.
Yeah. My boss, B. Dougie, has a blog post called Good First Issues Don't Exist. And first issues that's a label that you'll find on issues. So if you're looking for an open issue that maybe is better for somebody who's new to the project or new to open source altogether, looking at that label can be really useful. But in the blog post, he mentions good first issues don't exist except the ones that you write for yourself. So just because there's not an issue there for something that you want to work on doesn't mean that you can't create an issue and say, hey, I would like to add to these resources, or I noticed this bug in your project. So don't be shy about adding issues as well. Also, if anybody who's here wants to share tips they have for finding open source issues, feel free. You can add that in the chat or use that hand raise function, and we're happy to listen to what you've been using. Okay, so I think the next thing we should talk about is onboarding to a new project, because this is really important, both for your reputation, your credibility, your success in open source, and for the relationship that you build with maintainers. So, can you walk us through some of the things that are really important to remember when you're starting to work on a new project?
Yeah, so what I find it like very important and very helpful for me. Well, I knew about open source and started to contribute to open source back in 2019. I didn't know anything. I haven't joined like any communities, and I saw it on Twitter, now X, and I started on the Hacktoberfest. And when I back then there were not many how do you say resources of open source just like today. So I had to read like the README, the contributing guidelines for every project that I want to contribute to. But looking back now, I'm really grateful that there were not many resources back then, because it shaped my habit to read the project's documentation, especially the README and the contributing guidelines. Because please, whenever you want to contribute to open source projects, please read the README and the contributing guidelines. Because on the README, you will know about the project itself, like how it works and things like that, and also the installation process. And in the contributing guidelines, you will find like how to contribute. Like, do you have to ask the maintainers to work on an issue, or or is it okay if you just jump in and create a PR and things like that? So reading the project's documentation is a mandatory. It's not an option. And then it would be great if you can start small, and then maybe before starting small, like playing around with the project. Because if you want to contribute to a project, how can you contribute and understand about the goals of the project if you don't know how it works? So first playing around and then starting small. If you see like a bug or anything like that, you can create an issue. Or if you see like an issue that you think that you can work on, then you can try to take it, right? And then joining the project community. Usually a project, an open source project has like a Slack or Discord, or maybe they have this GitHub discussion that you can join, so that you can, know other contributors, know the maintainers, and then know about the project itself. You can ask around. And then if you need help, I'm seeing that sometimes folks feel hesitate to ask because I don't know, maybe they feel like I'm not sure where to start to ask. I don't know what to ask, or like maybe I don't want to look that I don't understand anything at all if I ask this question. But really, if you stuck in anything, like anything at all, just ask for help. Open source community usually are very welcoming and supportive. So they usually will help you out. And also be patient and persistence because well, a project can be challenging, right? It cannot, you cannot just like look at the project right now and then in the next hour you understand about like the whole project. So you want to be patient, but also persistence in understanding the project to be able to contribute to the project.
One thing that I want to emphasize as well, that communication is really important when you're communicating with a maintainer. But patience is super important. You know, maybe they're taking the weekend off, or maybe they're in a different part of the world than you are. But one of the things that's so important about open source is you're working in the open. Part of that means don't DM maintainers. Don't find them on Twitter or on Discord and then send them a DM and ask them for an update on your pull request. You can tag them in the issue or in the pull request to say like, hey, can you give me an update? Give them at least 72 hours. There's a lot of stuff that's happening, and it's not immediate. Sometimes it's not a priority for their schedule right then, but also sometimes they do miss it. IU knows for sure that I miss a lot of stuff. GitHub notifications are hard. She tagged me in an issue the other day, and like I saw it, and it was from June, and I felt really bad about that. Like somehow it got lost in all of my notifications. So be patient, but also do be polite when you need to tag them and say like, hey, do you have any more thoughts on this thing? And generally speaking, I usually apologize and say like, I'm really sorry that I missed this. We'll find a different variety of responses, but don't be discouraged. Ask for help, and it doesn't have to be that community either. You can ask for help at Virtual Coffee as well, or if you're in other communities that aren't specific to that project. Usually anyone that's contributed to open source can help you with the problem that you're having, or who's an expert in the technology, or who's one step ahead of you in your journey. So asking for help is a good thing. Okay, so as IU said, reading the documentation, that's a requirement. Don't skip reading the documentation. I've had quite a few contributions where I know people just haven't spent time reading the documentation. I know sometimes it can seem like a really lengthy process and you're really excited to get started. But it shows that you respect the maintainer's time and the effort that they put in, because essentially they have many contributors. And so they're empowering you by giving you almost everything that you need to get started. And I think like if we think about this in terms of a cookbook, you're submitting a pull request, which is kind of like completing a recipe. You wouldn't just like look at the picture and then like throw all the ingredients together and then find the recipe creator or the chef and be like, hey, is this right? Like, they're going to ask you, like, did you go through the recipe and follow the steps? And if you're like, no, they're going to like ask you, well, why are you contacting me? You have to follow the steps. So this is why it's important. Finding or creating an issue. Again, take a look at those issues, see if they're already assigned. Now at OpenSauce, in some of our repositories, our contributing guidelines have some special directions. We use a command in many of our repositories called the .take command. And so that what that means is that contributors can self-assign issues if it doesn't have a needs triage label. And so if they've read through the contributing guidelines, they'll know that that's all they have to do is write in the comments .take, and they're automatically assigned. But if we have people that say, can I be assigned this issue? We know that they haven't read through the contributing guidelines. And usually what we say is, please read through the contributing guidelines and figure out how to assign yourself. So this is another reason why it's important to read through those things. It's respecting the time of the people around you. Okay, so these are some of the things we've already talked about. Back and forth communication is really important. Be open-minded, be a good listener. I think that I know people are like, well, you don't really listen in open source because it's asynchronous communication. But really understand what the maintainer's telling you. If they're giving you feedback or if they're offering some discussion about the issue that you proposed, really take time to understand what they're talking about. Let's see. Don't spam pull requests. I showed you the Oscar score before. If you get a pull request that's marked spam, your Oscar score drops so low. And that's because it wastes the time of everybody involved and it makes it not a good experience to be part of open source. So what is a spammy pull request? Well, like if you delete one space or you add one space in a paragraph, then that's a spammy pull request. Don't just submit a pull request to get credit for submitting a pull request. Make sure you're assigned the issue before working on it. If you're working on an issue that you haven't been assigned, then you might be doing work for nothing. It might mean that somebody else is already assigned that issue. And I'm more likely to give an issue to someone that has followed the directions and been assigned than somebody that just says, here's a pull request for this issue. Because it's about following those steps and showing that you respect the process. Okay, so this is the last thing, but you can go ahead and follow through. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and drop this link, but this gives you step-by-step directions for how to go through the contribution workflow. So you're forking the repository, then you're cloning the fork, creating a new branch, then you're making the changes. You should always test your changes. Make sure that they work. So figure out how to run the project. You want to add and commit those changes and then push them up and create a pull request. Now, if you don't understand any of the stuff I just said, it's totally okay. Again, this is like a new vocabulary to learn. But what's important to know is that we have these resources here for you that you can walk through to understand this. And again, on Wednesday, we'll be going through what it looks like to make a contribution. So you can come on Wednesday or watch the replay on YouTube. And these are some of the things that we talked about as well. The last thing that I'll say before turning it over to Ayu to see if she has anything to add, we have here the Let's Get Practical section. And this gives you directions to contribute to our guest book at OpenSauce. And so this is actual step-by-step how to do the project process. And so if you're interested in walking through, please go ahead and use this to contribute to our guest book. And then if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask Ayu and I these questions. You can tag us in the open source channel in Virtual Coffee, or you can create a discussion post or an issue on the intro course repository. So before we close it out, Ayu, do you have anything that you want to add that you think is important or anything you'd like to emphasize?
Yeah, because Hacktoberfest is around the corner. When you mentioned about the spam pull request, just to remind all of you that if you have 2 pull requests marked as spam during the Hacktoberfest, then you will not be able to participate in Hacktoberfest like forever. So be careful with that. And also, contributing to open source is not just about code. When you see an issue to fix bugs, or you want to see like a feature, you know, in a project or something like that, create an issue. Also, content creation, for example, if you want to write a blog post about a project, about the concepts in a project or things like that, that's also contributing to the open source project itself, because sometimes the project itself, they don't have the time yet, for example, to promote the new features or things like that. you can go ahead and help them by creating content through, I don't know, blog posts or streaming or something like that. So don't just limit yourself in creating pull requests, but also look at the other ways that you can do to contribute to open source projects.
That's a great point. And I do know that there are projects out there that encourage non-code contributions. I think at least the last year, but maybe the year before that, Appright and maybe Directus actually had opportunities. If you created a blog post, then you could also create a pull request to add your blog post to one of their repositories. So you would get credit in Hacktoberfest for doing that thing. So definitely check that out. If there are repositories that you would like to recommend, definitely add them to our VC Preptember project. I'm going to try and grab the link here really quickly. Is it VC Preptember? Yeah. Okay, so if you're going to participate, this is good practice for you as well to add repositories that are good for folks to contribute to. And I know we're a little bit over time, but does anybody have any last questions? Okay, you can always let us know in Slack if you have any questions. I want to thank everyone for being here with us today and learning more about open source. And I especially want to thank IU for co-hosting with me today. All right, well, that wraps up our session for today. We will see you all later. Check out the rest of the resources we have in our Hacktoberfest playlist on YouTube.